All right, hey CNFers, The Front Runner, The Life of Steve Prefontaine is officially out by the great people at Mariner Books. Shout out to Jay Michaels and Eugene for being such a champion of the book so far. And shout out to the newest bookstore in Eugene, Hodgepodge Books, which is an independent bookstore and a tap room, beer and books. Get the fuck out of here. If you read it, you know the drill. Need ratings and reviews. I won't read them because I don't want to be driven insane. That's understandable. But that's the world we live in. Ratings and reviews. Goes for the podcast as well. Those have gone a little slow, gone very dry of late. Your call to action to support the book, me and ye ol' CNF Pod. Next event, Thursday, May 29th, 7 p.m. at Powell's Books at Cedar Hills Crossing. In conversation with Ruby McConnell under the shadow of Nike World Headquarters. Should be a good one.
Not quite to the point of like stripping off clothing.
Oh, that riff. Hey, CNFers, it's the Creative Nonfiction Podcast. That show where I speak to, primarily, writers about the art and craft of telling true stories, to tellers of true tales about the true tales they tell. And yes, unlike other podcasters, I speak with inflection. I'm Brendan O'Mara. What a dick. John O'Connor returns to the podcast to talk about the secret history of Bigfoot. Field notes on a North American monster. It's published by Source Books. The paperback is out any day now. And John and I spoke back in January, so we're getting right to it. Then he let me know the paperback would be out in May, and I'm like, sweet, let's table this bitch, and I'll package it then. You can find him at johnmoconnor.com to learn more about him and his curriculum vitae. And follow him on the gram. Get a load of this. He is at Center for High Energy Metaphysics. I don't know the meaning of it. It doesn't matter. John's first appearance on the show was to talk about his true story essay, Everything Gets Worse. It doesn't it? It always, always does. Which has one of my all-time favorite passages about despair. It was like, spoke to my core, to my heart. That was in November of 2019 when we last spoke for the podcast. This book is his first, and who doesn't like a deep dive into mythology, belief, fantasy, and the like? Show notes of this episode and more they're big, man. They are big and bad at BrendanO'Mara.com. Hey, since sunsetting the pod stack, I moved all that goodness over to the show notes. My favorite quotes from the episode, a link to a mostly accurate transcript that you can download for free, the text of the parting shot, and links to the backlog of 400, 300, 200, and 100 episodes ago. And there, on the website, you can also sign up for the Rage Against the Algorithm newsletter. Got to do that. It's the big thing. Permission assets. Been doing it forever. And people who dig it really dig it. Just like this podcast. First of the month, no spam. As far as I can tell, you can't beat it. And you can also consider Patreon if you think all this effort is worth a few bucks. Patreon.com/CNFpod. All right, John O'Connor's work has appeared in the New York Times, GQ, Men's Journal, and the Boston Globe. Oh, the Globe. It's my childhood newspaper. The Believer, Oxford American, and True Story. He's a really funny writer, dry wit, self-deprecating. You can imagine why I connect with his work so much. I'd say he's the perfect person, but he hates IPAs, so I know we can no longer be friends, and he's never welcome back on the podcast. JK. Parting shot on the front runner being out in the world and how I almost threw up from nerves. Seriously. But for now, here's John O'Connor. Cue the montage.
Tell it to me like you're watching a movie.
One tiny lowercase LOL will fucking sail me through.
Editing is about helping the writer think.
This is going to have to interest somebody somewhere other than me.
Community is such a big part of being literary citizenship, if you will. It's such a big part of what we do. And it's easy to kind of hole up in our own offices and to do our own things and kind of wall ourselves off. But it really is important to kind of cultivate those relationships and everything. So how important is having, just a community and a network around you to, make you feel less lonely and hopefully less shitty too?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, like, and I feel this definitely less so here than I did in New York, where I lived for most of my adult life, and everyone you bump into in New York is either a writer or a photographer, and sometimes both. So it's a little lonelier here. I'm in Cambridge, just down the road from Harvard, so it's a lot of academics, and also a lot of pharmaceutical people. I meet a lot of like physicists and chemists and scientists, and people with whom I don't have much in common, but so there's decidedly few writers, but makes it nice to run into people like Darcy, and I know a few other folks here too who are in the same kind of line of work as I am, and trying to balance, as you say, that kind of home isolation, which is also, to be totally honest, part of the allure is the the solitude and the separation. But yeah, you definitely need a point of connection, and so yeah, I've been fortunate enough to meet a few folks like that here, but it's not nearly so overwhelming as it is in a place like Brooklyn, So yeah, so it's nice in that respect, but there's it's a good balance.
And I think it comes with it being in this game for a while, and there are always those moments of comparison and jealousy, and having a good like community around you kind of gives you a sense of like, it kind of gets you out of your own head, and you start thinking of celebrating people's work versus always feeling somewhat envious. And I imagine just having those connections around you is like, if those feelings crop up with you, it probably helps assuage some of those feelings.
Yeah. I don't feel envy, I don't think, but well, I mean, maybe in some kind of deeper and maybe even more troubling, psychological level I do, but not noticeably. I feel like, but I do feel competition, I think, with people, just competition over resources, in a way, and just, trying to claim certain ideas, stake a claim to certain ideas before other people can, and especially when you're working with a subject that's sort of in the public sphere, you don't have any personal, any real wider claim to something than somebody else. It can be nerve-wracking, You think you've got the idea of the century, the next blockbuster idea, but you just got to get it out there in time. And so that I definitely feel. But yeah, it's. But I work in a relatively rare kind of niches, like like with Bigfoot, for instance. There wasn't a lot of competition, and with that, I sort of felt like I had. I mean, not that I had all the time in the world, but that there weren't a lot of people writing books about Bigfoot, probably for good reason. But there were essentially two that had been written, two books of journalism from, outsider looking in perspectives. One by, both great books, one by Bob Pyle and another by a Canadian journalist named John Zada. And, but both kind of focused specifically on this Pacific Northwest. And Pyle's is based in a wilderness area called the Gifford Pinchot, I think, National Forest, or it might be a wilderness area. And I think it's folded within the Mount St. Helens National Forest. It's like almost like an island within that. And then Zada's book is based in British Columbia. So, and there hadn't really been any journalists looking at the sort of Bigfoot phenomena in a wider sense of in the whole country. There had been scholarly and academic takes, but no journalists who really went and hung out with Bigfooters around the country. And so, and that's what I wanted to do. And I didn't see anyone doing that. So I felt like I was kind of safe in that respect from being usurped, having my idea kind of taken in that sense.
What did spending time with different subsets of Bigfooters illuminate for you?
Well, it's a good question. It's, there's certain parts of the country, I think, where the idea of Bigfoot doesn't seem so ridiculous. Like, to state the obvious, like the Pacific Northwest, Oregon, and Washington specifically, and up into the kind of coastal range of British Columbia and up until Alaska. There's such an immense wilderness there that the very idea of it, once you go there, seems totally plausible. You're like, oh, okay, well, at least I can see how once upon a time this struck people as perfectly reasonable. That's some 700 or 800 pound mammal lived here, and but what's kind of more popular, kind of a more kind of sinuous vein in Bigfooting these days is that it's sort of everywhere. It's in the Tampa suburbs. It's in the outside of Columbus, Ohio. It's in people's backyards outside of Dallas metroplex. So it's that phenomena that struck me as different. And that's where I encountered a little bit change of kind of a gestalt generally in Bigfoot and Bigfooters is when you get when he's everywhere, and then you sort of expect him to appear everywhere. I think I found a little bit maybe more wish fulfillment and among Bigfooters in those not so far flung places like that I hung out with, in Dallas and. Or I guess I was just east of Dallas and in a national forest in Kentucky and in upstate New York and in parts of Maine and so on. And but also it's also partly the luck of the draw, like who you happen to fall in with, what Bigfooters you decided you want to hang out with. And I was fortunate enough to meet some pretty sane and lucid ones, and I made a specific decision early on to not really go the woo, kind of the crazier route. And I got a few invitations to go do some kind of loopy stuff with Bigfooters in Georgia and elsewhere that, which we can get into later if you want to, with the kind of folks who associate Bigfoot with all sorts of kind of paranormal and supernatural phenomena. And, but that seemed like kind of low hanging fruit to me. And I sort of made a decision early on to not do that kind of strategically because it just seemed like a big can of worms that I wasn't prepared to deal with. So mostly I hung out with very, very, very like pretty sane and sober and lucid people, and that's what I wanted to do. Unfortunately, I wound up hanging out with some very cool people, some of whom are still my friends, or at least I'm still friendly with many of them. And it was a little mind-blowing. I mean, it was a great experience. It was totally bewildering and at times kind of disconcerting, but it was also, by and large, a great experience.
Yeah, I think people tend to associate naturally a Bigfoot with the Pacific Northwest and the deep, dark, evergreen rainforests that are out in this neck of the woods. I was really taken how the pan Bigfootiverse of it all, like being Kentucky and Texas and Massachusetts and upstate New York and the South, it just it spreads in its own way. And I wanted you to maybe just kind of talk about, or like, how did the Bigfoot myth just change by region, or how was it unique to each region?
Like, I don't know if like in Florida, there's like the swamp ape. I don't know if you know about that. And there's this Florida that's supposedly a 4-toed Bigfoot as opposed to the sort of regular 5-toed Bigfoot. But there are little variations like that. You hear people distinguish the change of the color of the fur changes, and the slope of the shoulders is slightly different, and so on, or the ligatures and the knees seem kind of apportioned differently, and so on and so forth. But by and large, we're talking about the same creature. That's what's interesting about it. It's almost totally uniform, and with a few regional distinctions, but it's by and large the same beast that people are describing, which is a 6 to 9 foot, 7, somewhere in the range of 700 to 800 pound bipedal ape, basically. Now people have a sort of a wide ranges of belief, or kind of ways of articulating like what the meaning of Bigfoot and what, how it kind of manifests in their lives. But we're basically talking about the same animal, which is I thought was kind of interesting, and that there wasn't more regional variance. But generally, yeah, people have, when people talk about Bigfoot and when you're having conversations with Bigfooters, mostly what people are referring to is Harry from Harry and the Hendersons, more or less,
Mm-hmm.
Or the famous profile that's on, every Bigfoot microbrew or coffee place out in Oregon or Pacific Northwest. It's that iconic profile is kind of mostly what people people think of.
Well, a part of the book that I especially love too is this, the exploration and the dive you took on the ivory-billed woodpecker, and this bird that is thought to be extinct. It may be, it may not be, and I don't know. Just how did that tie in to the story you were telling?
Yeah, so I wanted, someone else asked me that when I did that chapter. It's like, where'd you come up with this idea? And I think I got it from Peter Matheson, who writes about it in his very first book, Wilderness in America. It's kind of a almost like a catalog of extinct animals, or animals that are species that are going extinct in the United States. And he doesn't mention Bigfoot in that book, although, as I say in my book, Matheson later became a Bigfooter. So I think I made that connection. But I also knew when I was writing the book that I wanted a break from all the Bigfoot stuff. I just felt like readers would want a break, because I basically do 4 expeditions and hang out with all these Bigfooters, and it started to feel, I just sensed that it would be repetitive. And so I wanted to let people kind of come up for air a little bit, like midway through the book. And also I knew I wanted like a real life, a sort of biological corollary to Bigfoot, to sort of investigate how actual scientists and ornithologists kind of vet the existence or non-existence of a once real species. A lot of Bigfooters sort of claim to essentially be doing the same thing. And so I wanted to see how that was done, how they talked about it, how it was kind of vetted among ornithologists and scientists, and and like wildlife biologists, basically. So and it was a good excuse to kind of extend the range of my search a little bit and go further south, which I didn't really spend. Originally I had planned to go to Florida, and that kind of fell apart, and then this came up at a really opportune time, because I wanted to do it. I wanted to investigate the ivory bill, but I also had a very good friend of mine lives, just as it turned out, an hour away from the Cache River wilderness area, and so I was able to kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone there. And I just really wanted to have basically a narrative break from all the Bigfoot stuff.
Earlier in our conversation, you talked about the wish fulfillment of seeing Bigfoot, and there was a lot of that happening in the ivory-billed section too, where a pileated woodpecker looks very similar to the ivory-billed, and so you see that streak by, and because you're searching for the thing you desperately want to see, it's any movement you see, any silhouette you see might be confirming what you're hoping to find, I think. And I think that's kind of what you get at too.
Yeah, and you have very serious people like, David Allen Sibley in the book who I spoke to, and Tim Harrington, who is also a very serious ornithologist, worked for the Cornell lab for many years. And I just wanted to have that kind of contrast and compare sort of thing, to see how it's done, and the imperfections in real science and field work. It's a hard thing to do. Science is really difficult, and a lot of Bigfooters talk a big game about science and sort of want to behave scientifically and want to apply science to what they're doing, but it all kind of falls apart on them in the end, and for good reason, because science is really hard. Even like real field work for scientists is, I don't use the word real there to belittle Bigfooters, but that's for falsifiable and verifiable species that once existed, even determining that is just fraught with all kinds of very, very thorny problems. And anyway, I just wanted to have that as a kind of bulwark against both as a narrative break, but a bulwark against any criticisms to the book that I wasn't giving Bigfooters wasn't due diligence at giving them their kind of credit for what they do. So
yeah, and there's the moment where you paddle into the swamps, and you can easily get probably lost in there. There's snakes everywhere. There's all sorts of things, and then there's other times where you're like kind of deep in the woods, and it can be disorienting, especially in these Pacific Northwest woods. Like you get maybe 50 yards away from a main road. You can get turned around and get lost pretty quick. And I just imagine, just like for you, like especially like that true story essay where it's just like you kind of harken back to these, this almost like the futility of the modern life and sitting behind a desk. But here you were confronted with being out in the wilderness, and how just what was that experience of being out there and confronted with just how humbling nature can be, to be out in those elements and to surrender to it, really.
Yeah, and that's like, I think, as I argue in the book, that's a big part of the allure, a big part of the appeal of Bigfooting, is to kind of be humbled in that way and just remember what it's like to be in real wilderness. And yeah, I was humbled a number of times, and I used to do, I don't really do this anymore, but since I had kids, I don't do this much. I did this a lot for the book, but I hadn't done it since really pre-pandemic. But I used to try to do one big, if not two, kind of backcountry camping, or sometimes there was a skiing trip thrown in there too, but like at least one of those a year, either solo or with a friend. And and part of getting lost is like just part of the package with that stuff, and it can be both really exhilarating and totally terrifying. And it doesn't take much, like I was in the very end of the book, I write about the Chama Canyon wilderness area in New Mexico, where I went right before the pandemic in like 2019, like literally days before the lockdown. And I stepped off the trail there. It was still it was spring, or I guess it would have been mid-February, late February. And, it's part of the Continental Divide Trail, cuts through there. And I was on trail as far as I could tell. There was a little bit of snowfall. And but there was signage and like tree blazes every 100 yards or so. But at one point I stepped off the trail to do something, to take a leak or something, and I went back and I got turned around. I couldn't find the trail, and I have to tell you, man, I was this most terrified I'd ever. I mean, I was just like, it was comical looking back. I mean, just like thrashing through the trees, and tree branches thwapping me in the face, and almost like yelping in fear, and like just like, not quite to the point of like stripping off clothing, from exposure, but close. And all told, I was probably lost for like, I don't know, less than 10 minutes or something. And once I got my bearings, I realized, of course, that I could just, if I just walked downhill, like I would eventually hit the river that I'd sort of followed this river, followed the trail, but along the river on the way up, and then kind of, again, follow the trail in a kind of a switchback sort of thing up this little mountain. And once I gained some composure and kind of gathered my senses, I realized I was fine. I eventually did find the trail again. But man, I didn't have cell service. It was at a time of the year where there were no other hikers. And you realize right away how isolated you are, and also how little it takes, how ill-equipped we are, most of us are, to deal with that. I mean, we've just lost our ability to navigate for ourselves, and we've lost our confidence in our ability to navigate, and we've just become, for better or worse, very, very enfeebled by technology. And without that at hand, we're just completely, I mean, literally and metaphorically, just completely lost and helpless. And and if you spend any time in kind of the backcountry in this country, unless you know how to read a map and a compass, which I do not, it would have been helpful if I did, but I don't. And you'll inevitably kind of find yourself in those kinds of situations, I think. And it's and part of the claim I'm making in the book is that kind of reconnection, or what folks call rewilding, is part of the allure of Bigfooting. Is it's a lot of guys with gadgets and backcountry, with some backcountry chutzpah, if I'm saying that right, and just and a lot of hope that there's more out there, that there's something to be discovered out there, and that something might be, something, it might be Bigfoot, it might be something more kind of innocuous, it might, or actually maybe more kind of foundationally important. It might be themselves, it might be the sense of connectivity and reconnection with wildness, and the very idea of what it means to have wild places in this country, which are very, very quickly disappearing. It's really actually difficult, I discovered, to find yourself in a place without that kind of connectivity, but it can happen. You got to walk to it. You got to get out of your car and walk, but which people don't really love doing these days. But
Yeah, you wrote at one point that, anyway, maybe we're drawn to Bigfoot stories because they represent our hope that not every square inch of this continent has been slash burned and subdivided into a homogeneous glop of cordoned off by the rich to indulge their exclusive pathologies. And that kind of gets to the point of the rewilding feel. And yeah, if this belief in Bigfoot is something that gets people together and gets them outside and away from that capitalized, commoditized version of nature, that's nourishing in a lot of ways, even if Bigfoot may be, in fact, a myth.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I did a story a few years ago about Arches National Park. You were speaking earlier about 50-year anniversaries, and it was I think roundabout, or maybe just exactly the 50th anniversary of Desert Solitude by Ed Abbey, who I'm sure you know Edward Abbey, but he was he would have hated this term, but a nature writer, a writer from kind of mid-century to, I think he died in the 90s. I'm ashamed I don't know offhand, but his kind of first and I think best book is Desert Solitaire. He was a ranger in Arches National Park. It was actually just a monument back then before it became a national park in the late 50s. And so I wrote a kind of one of these, which the New York Times kind of specializes in these big anniversary stories. So I did a travel story about Ed Abbey and Arches and how it kind of transformed since it became a national park. And Arches, like a lot of those Western national parks, especially in Utah, like Zion and Bryce Canyon and Canyonlands, were at the time and definitely still are undergoing a huge attendance crush. It's insane. It's like since Abbey's day, it's like a 7,000% increase or something like that. Mm-hmm. And like now the park like regularly closes because they just can't sustain the amount of foot traffic and car traffic. And but I learned that something. I hung out with a ranger while I was there for a couple of days. A guy who was kind of a fan of Ed Abbey, and he showed me around a little bit. Showed me the site of Abbey's old trailer and a couple other locations where Abbey liked to hang out and go on his little desert jaunts. And but he told me that the average time of attendance for visitors to Arches is something like 2 hours, which means that that's just long enough to basically drive from the entrance to the turnaround at the Devil's Garden, I think it's called, and then drive back, which means that people are just experiencing it mostly through their car window, maybe step out and get a selfie of a couple of the, very photographable kind of sandstone buttes and so on. But people don't, rarely do people actually step off trail there. And I was talking to this ranger, he was kind of bewildered by it. I was like, because we were driving along and I was like, look at all these, there's all these old trails and little like washes or arroyos. And I was like, could you just, if you wanted to, just pull over here and just walk through one of these arroyos and like see where you end up, turn around, follow it back. And he was like, oh yeah, you could. And I was like, well, do people ever do that? And he said, no, almost never. And to me, that's like kind of just so sad. It's like, it's like part of to me, personally, that's totally the allure of it. Now, it's not for everybody. I realize some people want to do the whole tour bus thing. That's fine. But that just struck me as so sad and kind of depressing and like just a very, I don't know, just a kind of sad commentary on where we are and where our relationship to nature and to the natural world is. And that sense of connectivity has just been lost. And I feel like people have not only lost the connectivity, but they've lost the interest in it. They like the photograph more than they like the experience sometimes, it seems. And I sound very condescending and assholish, but I would include myself in that assessment sometimes. Sometimes you're just not up for it. But but that just seems to be part of the kind of landscape now, is that we don't actually experience the landscape. We just look at it.
Well, yeah, there's a bucket listy aspect, especially going to, say, national parks. Like I have a water bottle that has I put stickers on it when I go to a national park, and it's like all I have to do is maybe get get the Tetons in my sight line, and I get to put that sticker on there. But I don't necessarily have to, though I would, really immerse myself in the nature of it. And then there's another element of it with talk about pathologies, that if you don't document it on social media, like, did it ever happen? It's like the tree falling down in the woods. Like, did it happen if you don't post it on Instagram? And people have really lost touch with that element of it. Like, certain things should just be ethereal and experienced on a human basis. It doesn't have to be documented to then flex to a bunch of people in that regard.
Yeah. I do the same thing. I mean, I have my favorite hat as a Sawtooth Mountain Guides hat, these guys who I used years ago for a story I did in Idaho. But I'm not, it sort of advertises something that I'm not, which is a mountain guide, but it's almost like my own kind of walking Instagram post on my head that I kind of am proud of, that I did it, and that I maybe even want people to ask me about or something, anyway, it's not like I'm immune to it at all, but it is something. It is one of these threads that courses through the book, and that just came up again and again.
And of course, you write the book through a very subtle comedic lens throughout the whole thing, and I think that is just partially your taste. But I imagine that it was also a choice you were trying to make it funny as well as informative. So, just what was the calculus that you were thinking to tell this story through and at times ironic point of view?
Yeah, I definitely, like, the tone was a big part of this book. I didn't want, as a writer, I have a hard time taking myself seriously for very long, but I didn't, and I have a hard time with writing that takes itself seriously for too long. And so I definitely, it's just a part of my, the punchline, I think, is part of what appeals to me. But I had to be careful with this subject to not make it seem like I was poking fun or talking down to them at all. When I'm making fun of anybody, it's me for the most part. So, and that the punchlines are mostly, I think, if not entirely, at my expense. But tone was a big concern at first, and I lost sleep over it. And my wife could tell you, I was like, I just did not want to come across as like this guy from Cambridge parachuting in to behind the Bigfooting lines to, cast my kind of disparaging eye all around at people, and wag my finger or whatever. Like, I just, I didn't want to do that. I had to be critical of things that I've found were sort of wanting, ideas that were wanting, but I also wanted to be fair to my subjects, and fair to the truth and fair to my subjects, I guess. And so I don't know if you saw. I was just thinking about this because I just saw on Friday the yacht. This is going to sound very strange, but bear with me. The Yacht Rock documentary on HBO. Have you seen that?
I have heard of it, but I have not seen it.
Okay, it's got our mutual friend Amanda Petrushish in it. As a
very nice.
Head. Yeah, she's which I think you had her on way back in 2018 or 2019 or something. She's one of the talking heads, but it's one of these subjects that's like, let's just say, is vulnerable to critique. It's like, it's a musical genre that's not generally held in high esteem, but the talking heads like Amanda and Questlove and various people, they're honest about its vulnerabilities, but they also clearly, genuinely like it and like what it represents. And it's an incredibly good-natured documentary that takes seriously the genre shortcomings, but also celebrates the good parts about it. And that, in a way, I think I might be the first person to draw a connection between Yacht Rock and Bigfoot, but that is exactly the kind of tone it struck me that I was after, where I wanted to celebrate what I thought was good about Bigfoot and the idea of Bigfoot, but also have my critical, lens on it other times, where I thought some of this kind of self-defeating and demonstrably bad ideas about Bigfooting I had to be honest about also.
Well, in talking about, respecting the people you're following, you wrote about, the Janet Malcolm-y way of exploitation and voyeurism. Definitely something I wrestled with, even just in doing the biography writing that I've done, and it is this idea of to what extent are we exploiting people and honoring them, but also being critical, but being fair. Just over the course of your reporting, just to what extent were you constantly wrestling with that journalist in the murder ethic?
Yeah, a lot. I think a lot. It's more pronounced, I think, than it maybe is with Janet Malcolm or someone like Tom Wolfe, because mostly who the people who are skewing are like society people with like stature and standing. Not always, but or let's just say in Janet Malcolm's case, sometimes people who really have it coming. But with me, my subjects were not like that at all. They were the opposite. They were people who, types of people who tend to be totally invisible, ignored by the media, ignored by the culture at large. And I had to be super aware of that, and I wanted to be sympathetic to them, maybe even more so than I might be if I were interviewing some politician or something like that. I didn't want to come in and wag my finger and tell, and have the sense that I sort of knew something that they didn't, and that they're wrong. There's just no way that they could have seen what they said they saw. Both in an interpersonal level, you can't behave that way, obviously, but also as a writer, I don't think you can behave that way. You can't. You don't want to project or telegraph to readers what your own beliefs are, or at least not very often, and you also cannot behave towards your subjects in a disparaging or condescending way, and that hopefully I didn't do. I think I don't think I did, and I haven't heard otherwise. But also I didn't want to pander to them and to the beliefs. So there was this kind of funny sweet spot of ambiguity, if I'm making sense here.
Yeah.
Between like being honest about being fair to the truth, as I said, and also fair to their beliefs. Just walking that kind of tightrope walk sometimes. But I thought that was really important.
Yeah, you hold on to your skepticism while respecting their belief in it, without condescending or insulting them. It's like at one point you write about their intoxicating power of belief, a power that's in all of us, and you say like Bigfoot may or may not be real, I thought, but either way, there's something profoundly true about the feelings it evinced. And so in a way, even though maybe you don't believe, but the fact that they do, I think you found charming and respect, and you respected that.
Yeah, and I come down really hard on, or at least I take a few swings at kind of unverifiable, unfalsifiable beliefs, but like religious belief. I have this whole part of the chapter where I try to place Bigfoot within kind of almost New Ageism, and have some hard words for that kind of thinking. But there are obviously great uses for religion and for religious beliefs too. Just thinking about Martin Luther King a lot yesterday, and it's hard to imagine the civil rights movement without the Black church. You don't have to listen along to his speeches or to listen to gospel music and to hear that sort of that siren song of Black dignity and Black redemption. And so there's a lot of great uses to belief, and there are some good ones with Bigfoot. Also, again, I might be the first to link gospel and the civil rights movement to Bigfoot, but or at least draw commonalities. But there are also great uses to Bigfoot and the belief, and I understand and sympathize with the desire to believe in something like that. It would say a lot about American ecology, about the robustness of our forests, but I did not see anything to validate that belief in a year of Bigfooting.
And as you're approaching the writing of it, did you ever experience that panic that comes in when you don't necessarily think you can, or you lack the confidence to find the through line? I know that's something I experienced, and I wonder for you, like if you just like, oh my God, is there enough new that I can that I can talk about? How am I going to pull this off and connect all this together? To what extent maybe did you or not experience that?
It's funny with this book, I didn't so much, partly because I'm finding a real point of connection with you, actually, with in respect to my new book that I just turned in, which maybe we could talk about a little bit if you want. I don't want to get us too off track, but it's a similar kind of, not a straight up biography, but a kind of portrait of a mid-century American figure. But with this book, I really wrote it and reported it exactly how it appears. I mean, I had like basically 11 months from start to finish. So I would go out and, travel somewhere, report, come back, write the chapter, travel somewhere, and fly somewhere, come back, write the chapter. And hence the what was the original title, which was Field Notes on the North American Sasquatch. And I really conceived it and wrote it like field notes sort of thing, which I thought kind of would leave me, let me off the hook a little bit from that through line that you're talking about. Not entirely, but I thought a little bit. And so I did have anxiety about it in the very beginning, but I thought my concept would kind of would erase that somewhat. Although it turned out they changed the title. The subtitle still carries a little bit or more than a little of the echo of the original title, but I thought that framework kind of, would, relieve me from having to have like a thesis or something, for lack of a better word.
For sure.
That makes sense. But my current project, which I don't want to say too much about, but is about a guy, Terrence McKenna, kind of forgotten, or it's largely forgotten psychedelic guru from the 60s and 70s, hung out with Timothy Leary and Allen Ginsberg and all these people.
He's a big name around here in Eugene.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah. And he's that I'm definitely struggling with, or struggle a lot with. I'm still waiting momentarily to receive edits from my editor, and I suspect that's something that's going to come up, because I struggled with that, to remind myself, or just remember, every month or so, to remember as I started finishing a chapter, like, oh God, how does this, wait a minute, I'm contradicting myself now. How did I, wait a minute, does this connect to the beginning? Like, how is it, what's the connective tissue here? Am I losing kind of sight of that? And so it's still going on, a lot of anxiety and hand wringing over that.
Yeah, you a moment ago you said how you lost sleep over just the tone of the writing, and it sounds similarly like this new biography might be eliciting a different kind of 2 a.m. voice, and it's something I greatly experienced over the last 2 years. But when that 2 a.m. voice is speaking to you, how do you quell it?
It's funny, especially when that 2 a.m. voice, it's regarding someone who's dead and who's not here to defend themselves. It's just much more powerful than if I think if they're a living person, and they have, as Terrence says, and I'm sure Prefontaine does too, people who, survivors, people who remember him and who have a stake in his kind of legacy, and a stake, both a literal and kind of figurative stake in his legacy. And so with that, I just, it's funny, when I'm away from it, it's panic time when I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm like, oh my God, I just completely screwed the pooch on that, on this, that, or the other. And but then once I get up and I actually start working on it, my fears are usually allayed, and then I can start feeling a little bit better about the actual execution of it, And no book is gonna, I think, no writing is going to quell those thoughts altogether. There'll always be problems, and it's just, I think, a matter, for me at least, of what problems I can live with in the end.
Well, yeah, I think what you say, like when you kind of get back to the work of it, because you can really start, your brain will just start tying itself in knots with various and myriad uncertainties, and as you're starting to uncover more certainty in the story just through sheer heft of reporting and in the research, you're like, okay, the Polaroid picture's starting to come into focus a bit more, and then it's like, okay, the anxiety to some degree starts to lessen a bit, but it's not until you start formulating the picture and building the marble of the work from scratch, it's there is quite a bit of anxiety and panic because you're like, wow, I have this thing in my head, but how am I going to manifest this thing into something that feels that makes sense and has a pulse and is fresh and new? All these things just start bombarding you. But it seems like you quiet that voice as best you can and lean into the work. And then the more you do that with rigor, it starts to coalesce. And it's like, okay, maybe I can sleep till 3 a.m. this time.
Yeah. Or yeah, totally. Yeah. It's funny. It's like, I think with Bigfoot, the subject kind of, like, I just, I don't mean to like be sort of disparaging my own work or anything, but I think I thought because of the subject that like people wouldn't be, not that people wouldn't be that interested in it, I guess, but I thought like the subject just, created a lot of kind of open space for me to just experiment and kind of say what I wanted and not really have to worry too much about that stuff because it very quickly tips into the sort of realm of the fantastical and the magical and paranormal and so I just felt like that in and of itself gave me a lot of freedom to not say things. Just not worry so much, I guess. But now I feel like I'm reaping a little bit of much more of the brunt of that with this book because it's just there are a lot of people out there who are really going to care what I have to say. So,
For sure.
At some point, you just have to have. Speaking of belief, you just have to have faith in the work, I think.
Well, yeah, and belief is really at the core of your Bigfoot book, and in one part a little bit later, it's struck me as just me personally. You have this just little meditation on capitalism, and you're right, like capitalism, winner take all, casino style capitalism, toxic for everyone except the rich. More like a racket for redistributing upward than an engine of general prosperity, and you cite some of the researchers who coined that. But it got me thinking about, myth and belief, and my gosh, like prosperity in the American dream is its own kind of Bigfoot myth. And it kind of keeps us clawing at hope that maybe individually we'll win the lottery or something, if we just work harder, and that might manifest itself. But in a way, it's every bit as real as Bigfoot, that upward mobility that I think a lot of us in that American dream, it's like, did it exist at all? I don't know.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's a quote. What you quoted was a quote from that Deaths of Despair book about the opioid epidemic, and I'm kind of trying to triangulate there between that and kind of white despair and white belief and kind of white working class belief. And Bigfoot is this vector of, again, I'm kind of generalizing here, but white working class conservative men. And they're talking about those Princeton economists whose names escape me, who wrote that book, Deaths of Despair, talking about white working class men without a college degree who have really suffered considerably over the last several decades. And are arguably more so than anyone else, have seen that American dream disappear. And so there's a funny confluence here that a lot of people are surprised about, and some are irritated by me bringing kind of Trump into the picture. And I've got a lot of the reviewers in and of themselves haven't mentioned it, but like these aggregate sort of opinion places like Amazon or Goodreads, people have complained about the book as too quote unquote political. And somebody on, I think it was like Goodreads, counted and said that I mentioned Trump something like 28 times. I haven't fact checked this, but that surprised me because I thought it would have been like 7 times or something,
Yeah.
But I also it just, I don't like, if you're writing about something like I'm writing about what, with all due respect to my subjects, so I don't think are stupid, but I'm writing about something that in my estimation is a mass cultural delusion. Trump is going to come up, and he did come up a lot, both in my own kind of reporting among Bigfooters on expeditions and at conferences and conventions and so on, but also it just came up while writing. Like I couldn't ignore it in a sort of age of magical thinking that he represented, especially that initial election back then. He was still president when I was writing, and when I began writing at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020. And yeah, and also I just like, I don't know why. Say what you will about like people on the political left, like that we're at least able to kind of make fun of ourselves. Like we can make fun of Biden and Harris, and whether it's like the Onion or the Today Show and Jon Stewart. It's like we're good at satire and poking fun at it. We're kind of equal opportunity shit talkers, but for some reason, people who tend to be Trumpists, I know again I'm generalizing, don't accept that when, especially, and it's weird with somebody who is just crying out for mockery and for satire, like virtually every utterance, and people just don't have a sense of humor about it. And when you say stuff about Trump, they just cannot let it pass. But anyway, but that goes back to your I think your original point, which is this kind of convergence of Bigfoot and belief and magical thinking, and also kind of white working class ideologies, which all strangely converge in this book in a couple of ways.
Oh yeah, well it's a trip, and I really quite enjoyed it, and fully hope people get it in their hands, because it is a great meditation on belief and wilderness and fantasy and all sorts of like just wonderful intersections and field notes, as you said. So it was just really fun and entertaining and informative read and meditation. So yeah, it was awesome.
Oh, thanks for saying that, man. I really appreciate it.
Nice. Well, John, as I bring these conversations down for a landing, I always love asking the guests for a recommendation, and it can just be anything you're excited about that you want to share with the listeners. So I'll just extend that to you as we wrap up.
Yeah, sure. I'm going to cheat here and do two real quick ones, if you don't mind. And the first is kind of a shout out to somebody who I'm friendly with. I've actually never really met in person, but we have friends in common. It was a really fantastic writer named David Ramsey, who your listeners probably won't know unless they're subscribers who are or regular readers of the Oxford American magazine. But David has a Substack called Tropical Depression, Tropical Depression, and he writes a lot about music and art and culture, and he's just an extraordinarily gifted writer. But one of these writers who, for whatever reason, is doesn't have a book. He hasn't been able to kind of crack the Da Vinci Code of publishing, and so I think he sails under the radar of a lot of readers. And but he's just a brilliant guy. Has an ear to some kind of strange oracle. He's from Arkansas. I would see him in a kind of a long kind of venerable tradition of almost Southern Gothic writers. He's just an amazing guy, amazing writer. And even my wife the other day, we were talking about Little Richard came up, the musician, and Davey wrote a piece about Little Richard like a decade ago. Something my wife was like, God, you remember that piece that David Ramsey wrote about? It's just fucking amazing. And it's true. It really was. It's memorable, that 10 years on. And so I can't recommend him enough. And a book I just finished last night comes to mind is Ian Fraser's just magisterial biography, kind of a travel book of the Bronx called Paradise Bronx. And it's a big book, like a doorstop of a book, but it's just, he's another writer who on the surface, it doesn't seem to be a whole lot remarkable that's happening, but cumulatively it just has this really incredibly moving and like just bracing effect. And I don't know how he does it, and but whatever he's doing is just really magical. To hear Ian Fraser, who is, I think he would admit, is like maybe one of the whitest guys to ever live, but to hear him write about the history of hip hop and like Kool Herc and like Grandmaster Flash and all that, and emerging during the the battle days of the Bronx is burning and stuff. It's just an amazing history, and it really moved me a lot and just made me realize what great writing could do and great reporting. And so anyway, sorry to give you two there, but those are my two.
I love it. Oh, that's great. Well, John, thank you so much for coming back on the show after a few year hiatus to talk about Bigfoot and dip our toe into what you're working on next and everything. So just thanks for the time, thanks for the work, and yeah, this was great. Thank you so much for carving out the time for us.
Oh, thank you, Brendan, man. I really appreciate it.
Yes. All right. Thanks to John for coming back on the show to talk all things Bigfoot. That was a good jam. Thank you, CNF and listener, for making it this far. Got a big ol' parting shot here. This is going to settle in. Maybe get a fresh sink of dishes. Because I think by the time you're done listening to this parting shot, you will have cleaned your kitchen. I mean, it's not that long, but you get it. So yes, the front runner is out, and I have feelings, as you might imagine. I won't bury the lead about the barfing. Okay, so on Wednesday, May 21st, at about 3 p.m., 3 hours before my big book launch event, big in quotes, whatever. It's the launch event with Run Hub, the community run, and then the Cold Fire Brewing. I get this email from a key source, Nita Prefontaine, who's Steve Prefontaine's older half-sister by about 10 years. I get an email from Nita's daughter. And once you guys get a hold of the book and you read the first chapter, you'll realize there's some sensitive material. And that's some of the most revelatory material in the entire book, really, right in those first 10 pages. So her daughter wrote, she goes, "Hi there. I'm inquiring for Nita Prefontaine about your book. Her son just got a book he purchased. She would like to speak with you regarding some errors she feels very strongly about. Will you please call as soon as possible? We understand you have a book signing tonight. Sincerely." Yeah. Immediately, my stomach balled up into a Gordian knot, and if I had food in my stomach, I would have thrown up. Like, what could be wrong? Like, we handled this opening chapter with delicacy and skill and sensitivity in trying to lay things out there, lay the facts out there, but also not sensationalize and not over-index on it, but to just kind of lay it out there and set the tone early in that particular chapter. And, with Nita, I'm like, did she not realize she was on the record while we were speaking? Was she going to dispute some of the material that I dug up through some court records of her parents' divorce from 1946? I immediately pulled up our transcript to make sure. I was like, for whatever she might bring up, I'm like, okay, let me see if I can back up what I wrote. And I pulled up the court record PDF as well, all of which details some really gnarly shit, she and her brother endured. So I call her, doesn't pick up, voicemail. I wait another hour. I've got my head in my hands at my desk. My stomach is imploding. If there are major errors in one chapter, gosh, the first chapter, most people will actually read this chapter. It's the opening chapter. For a significant amount of readers, maybe they won't make it through the end of the book, like a lot of people don't make it to the end of a podcast or don't make it to the end of fill in the blank. But most people will read that first chapter. And it's not like if there's anything significantly wrong, I can just issue a correction in tomorrow's paper, apologize, and move on. So as I'm really in my head, stomach further imploding, I email a friend, I email my editor. Everyone's pretty on edge. Like, this is the day after publication. This is when you're supposed to be the most excited. I am jazzed, and I'm like, fuck, I got this event now, and I've got this hanging over my head. Like, what could it be? And so I just think, all right, just call her back. Say you understand that you have some concerns. I'm here to listen. Any errors that were made were not malicious. And I tell myself, don't get defensive. Just hear her out. Call her up again. She picks up. And her voice is bright and sunny, just as I remembered it. I was like, okay, this is a good way to start. And I said, I'm here to listen. Like, what did you notice? And by now, my stomach is gone. I am stomachless. Well, she said, you called me Nita Fleming. I'm not Nita Fleming. I'm Nita Prefontaine. And then suddenly my stomach starts to come back. I said, oh, okay, I understand. Like in 1975, in the prologue, in the story that I cited as part of Prefontaine's funeral, that was your married name at that time. Now, I could have and maybe should have made a parenthetical or a footnote that says that, you go by Nita Prefontaine in the current day. And she understood there. She was like, okay. That was the first one. Next, she asked, and what do you mean by corporal punishment? And I was like, oh. I'm like, okay, well, all right. My understanding that when parents beat their children, it's corporal punishment. She's like, oh, okay, that's what I thought. It's like, I think that was a little dramatic. I would have used a different word. I was like, okay, fair enough. And my stomach is starting to come back more. And then she's like, all right, like one more thing. Like in the audiobook, he pronounced my name Netta, not Nita. It's Nita. I was like, oh, okay. And I didn't read the audiobook. I didn't hear a draft of it. You know what I mean? But maybe I can ask my editor if we can find a way to retrack your pronunciation. And, then she said how much she's enjoying the book so far, how the early part really made her cry, how true it was, how happy she was that I included this abuse that was so traumatic and foundational to Nita and Steve's upbringing. We spoke and laughed a little, and we plan to meet up so I can give her a signed book in the not-too-distant future. So that was Wednesday, the day after pub day, and to be met with that questioning of accuracy and an email that was just worded in a way that felt like earnest and heavy, but like heavy with concern and, leaden down by disappointment, it turned me inside out. And Netta said she'd call if she had any more errors she finds. I was like, okay, fair enough. Pub day itself, it was pretty slow. I made an appearance on the radio, Fox Sports Radio with Danny and Justin, and they were great, engaged, really fun. It was probably a good, like a 15-minute segment, and the couple interviews I've done, they're going to be on my website, and that way you can listen to me blather on without a script in front of me like I am right now. The words that are tumbling out of my mouth right now, these are not on my script. Anyway, Danny asked me if I was nervous when we were off mic at the very end, and I was like, shit, I guess I sounded nervous. And I said, well, yeah, I'm just getting started with all of this, and live interviews aren't my strong suit. And, especially when you're on the radio and you're tight for time, it's not the podcast sphere. We can get as long-winded as we want, and if it's way too long-winded, we can always cut it back and edit. But when you're in the moment, you got to really pre-edit yourself, and hopefully you're hitting the right beats with your messaging, answering their question, giving them enough, being entertaining and engaging and charismatic in a tighter soundbite that gives the audience what they want and also teases the material in the book so people will go buy it. There wasn't this rush of media. It was pretty quiet, borderline morose. It weirdly felt like the end of something, not the beginning, which if and when, you guys write and publish a book, you experience this weird sense that it's no longer your little secret. Even though you tease and you share little things here and there and you talk about it, I talked about it nonstop for 3 years, basically. Yeah, and maybe it's akin to seeing your kid off to college. I'm not a parent, not going to be. But you nurtured and shaped this thing for years, and then somewhat unceremoniously, you have to trust it to walk through the world on its own, to be met with judgment, to stand on its own 2 feet. It represents itself, but just as much reflects and represents its caretakers, the writer and the editor and the other villagers who helped raise this bit of ink and paper. The feeling is, ultimately, it is of proudness. And what makes my eyes really burn up, even when I was writing the script, not so much now, I kind of got it out of my system, but I was writing it, I was like really tearing up. Because one of my, some of my really dearest friends, they reached out and they said how proud they were of me and how much they've always believed in me, even when I so rarely believed in myself. And how they wish success for me, even when I so rarely think I deserve it for myself. So those messages and texts or post to Instagram stories, made parting with the front runner far less sad, and a chance to celebrate how fucking hard we worked on this thing. And we should be proud of it. And it is a definitive text. In 10 or 15 or 20 years from now, this is still the book. This is going to be the book that people pull off the shelf to read. And that's what my editor hopes for this book. That's his vision for this book. So the event with Run Hub and Cold Fire, it drew about 25, maybe 30 people. It was a little low. I thought it might be more than that because we did put a bit of juice behind it. I did read a passage at the behest of Jeremy of J. Michael's books. He asked me if I was reading. He's selling the books, and if he thinks me reading a passage would help, I acquiesced. It was a tight little scene. I could read it in less than 10 minutes. I signed a bunch of books, stamped a bunch with my custom Stop Pre stamp with red ink. Answered questions from Lily of Run Hub, who's actually a journalist and leaving Run Hub to join Lookout Eugene, which is a kind of a new newspaper, online newspaper in town. Really cool. It's nice to run into another journalist. I had no idea she was a reporter. The audience asked some great questions, and I was so busy talking from the moment I was setting up all my gear and through the event and then breaking it down that I didn't even get a chance to have my favorite beer, the Cumulus Hazy IPA from Cold Fire. I love it. It's almost like orange juice, but it's like if orange juice was beer. It's pretty great. Anyway, maybe another time. I'm sure there's going to be more drama going forward, and I'm sure I'm going to lose my stomach again, and I'm going to have to find a way to put it back into my gut. But for now, stay wild, CNFers, and if you can do, interview. See ya.